coping with grief and loss, and it was for the loss of loved ones. And many people had expressed that they have lost loved ones and that having different ways to cope can make a difference um, because it's a major loss. Another form of a major loss can be different things that we lose along the path of life journey. And there can be a variety of different types of losses that we can all experience as part of aging, as part of the environment changing, as far as society changing. And those are things that we don't necessarily talk about or acknowledge. And that lack of conversation around them can also lead to even more isolation and feelings of loneliness in your own losses. And so I wanted to bring those also to the table so we can talk a little bit about those things and acknowledge them as being very real losses and things that are very important to both acknowledge and find ways to cope with and support each other with as well. So tips of coping with grief, life losses is what I called this talk. So losses can obviously be part of a loved one's passing, and many things come with that. When you lose a loved one, you also sometimes lose different social connections that you had in the community and some of your family structure, depending on what role they held in your family. So for example, if someone loses a partner, it can change their family structure and their interactions with other people. And so that's an additional form of grief where not only did you lose your partner and you miss them, but you also maybe miss going places as a couple and some of the different things that you did as part of that. So that I call like a loss of family structure. Also, there can be loss of things related to your health. For example, if you're not able to be as mobile as you were and physically active, maybe you like to mountain climb or motorbike or travel the world, different things like that. Some things you may still be able to do, but maybe not to the extent you wanted to do before. And that is a real loss, especially if that was part of, your lifestyle and your dream and things that you really enjoyed. And now you have to kind of make adjustments and change the way that you approach those things. That is counted as a loss. But oftentimes we have no place to acknowledge those, no place, to talk about those things. Maybe people really love to camp and mountain climb, and then now they find they have to adjust to hotels. Some people might have been fine with hotels, but if you were a camper and all of a sudden you have to change how you do things, that's a real loss for some people. Additionally, loss of independence. Many times, we all pride ourselves on being independent adults and being able to take care of things that we need. And even if we still can do that, as we get older, we tend to need to ask for more help. And that can be a hard thing to do. And it can be a loss of our being able to contribute, especially if we're the people that are used to taking care of others and doing things for others. And now all of a sudden we need to ask others to help us. That can be not only a loss of our role of doing things for others, but then a shift in also having to ask for help from others is a real loss, almost a double loss in there. And that's why it can feel so hard sometimes to make that shift. Also, loss of status and career. For example, if we worked really hard to get a career established, to get our work going through education or just work experience, and many people wear that hat as part of who they are. When we take that hat off in retirement, as much as people celebrate that, it can also be really hard because it can feel like a loss. Well, like where do I connect now? Who do I feel like now when I no longer wear the hat and the career that I spent, most of my life working up to? And many times when people retire, they're at the pinnacle of their career. So then leaving at that point and then not having another hat to put on can be a loss, very much so. Some people it's not so much, but everyone is unique and different. And I think that is the part that's really important to honor. Because everyone is unique and different and responds to things, it makes it sometimes, though, more challenging to find somebody else who can relate to where exactly what you're going through with a loss. And then if you do shift your career, sometimes your finances and your routines and your social things change because you might have been going out to company conferences or business dinners or things like that. And all of that can also shift as your life transitions to more of retirement type of interactions. It can change. And then finding other ways to have meaningful connections ends up being more of an actionable item that you need to actually rebuild in a different way that many people are not really thinking of when they first retire. So those are just things that are actually very real losses. And it's really important to acknowledge them. And so that's why this is part of this talk. One of the paradoxes about loss is that we're all like humans, but we're mammals, and we're related to the mammal response where if something's painful, we recoil from it. So if something's really uncomfortable, like a loss or grief, it's just a human nature and a mammal nature to want to avoid that. Because it's a survival instinct to not want to feel pain and to gravitate away from pain. And that has real protective measures. But one of the things about avoiding something that's emotional is when you avoid the loss or even thinking about the loss, it can actually become bigger and it can even make it more challenging to adapt. And your window of tolerance for change can shrink. And so in order to really adjust to that, it starts with acknowledging that there is a loss and sharing that there is a loss with supportive people to kind of help move forward in that and adjust to it and create something new that maybe fills in that hole. So I suggest that thinking about what things might have be different now than were before, when you were younger and more active, and kind of just giving an idea of what type of losses might have felt along the way that weren't acknowledged is kind of a place to start. It gives you a way to process that, and grief of that is normal. It's a normal part of life, a normal part of aging. We also even grieve our children's, like you love your child when they're 2 or 3, but they're a different person when they're in their teens, and then they're different when they become adults. And so part of life is adjusting to the changes. You don't ever get the little 2 or 3-year-old back. And you adjust to them being a teenager or them being an adult. We're doing the same thing with ourselves and our lifestyles, but we don't often talk about it. So that's what we're doing here, is kind of bringing it to the forefront and challenging you to think about ways to kind of reduce the avoidance and maybe think a little bit more meaningful about it, which many of you have already done just in acknowledging that you have health issues and coming here to strengthen yourself, to get more knowledge about the food that you eat and the diet and nutrition, and to exercise. You're already facing some of the things in a way that many other people don't. And so I commend you for all of that. And at the same time, those same strategies where you're slowly building up your energy can also help you slowly build up your lifestyle and things after having losses. Because grieving is a normal way of dealing with loss. So some tips on how to grieve loss of something important is that you can write a letter to the loss. You can write a letter to the part of your life that you feel like you no longer are able to partake in. And sometimes just that can be a cathartic thing in itself. You can just talk to it. Also, like, hey, back, what's going on with you today? You're not as strong as you used to be. And it makes me frustrated. And what can we do to help strengthen you so that we can be better in the future? Kind of acknowledging that and having that conversation and expressing your feelings, it gets it out of your body and it gets it out of your mind. So you can do it however you feel comfortable. You can, think about it in your mind. You can write about it, talk about it, but ways that you can get the frustration out actually keep it from being pent up in your body and avoiding the loss and carrying that along with dealing with your back pain that limits you and keeps you from doing things and that you might otherwise want to do. Classic aspects of grief like denial, bargaining, anger, and depression can also be part of that. So it's not always the classic order or those classic emotions that people feel. Sometimes you might feel frustrated. That's actually a really common thing when it comes to loss of some of the physical things that you might have used to be able to do, or loss of independence where you might feel frustrated that you need to ask somebody for something you used to actually help other people with, things like that. But allowing those feelings to come, and then one of the things that I use is like even giving them a color and breathing them out, letting them go out of your body with the breath, and then breathing in some fresh air. So you would, think about how frustrated you are maybe about your back, if your back is aching that day and you're not able to do the things, or your knee, and breathing out that frustration in a color that you think maybe illustrates that, whether it could be red or brown or black, whichever. And imagine your breath breathing that out and then breathing in fresh, clean, clear, white air energy down to that area. So that's a real common thing. Some people use even the breathing techniques of like Qigong to help with breathing and dealing with pain that maybe their breath can help with, and breathe out and breathe in. And it helps them time that, and it helps deal with sometimes the loss of what they're going through, and then also mitigating the pain. But if you avoid that, chances are good you're still going to be frustrated, and you're going to carry the back pain and the frustration with you through the day. So the other thing is sharing with other people that are supportive, and then also, excuse me, checking in with your energy. So when you lose things that are important to you and you feel frustrated or angry or anxious, that creates energy. And then that uses the energy in ways that maybe aren't as productive towards you, something that you want to do. It kind of is like your phone, where if your phone has to do a whole bunch of activities at once, it zaps the battery in the phone and the phone battery goes down. So it's important to realize that on those days when you're not feeling as good and you maybe are dealing with pain and frustration, and you're acknowledging that you have a loss, that's your battery, your internal battery is working harder. So then it's important to like check in with yourself and acknowledge that you might have less energy overall to deal with things that day. And how can you spend your energy in a meaningful way? Thinking that your battery may be less charged, or your gas tank may be less full. And so how can you spend that energy in a way that is the most meaningful? So for example, you might need to reduce down the amount of things you do that same day so that you conserve your energy. And you might have to think about what is the most meaningful way to spend your energy that day. Might be important also to go to bed earlier, or things like that, to take care of yourself, to conserve your energy until you're recharged. So throughout the day, checking in with yourself as often as you check your phone. People are used to checking their phones and their phone battery sometimes more than checking in with themselves and checking your own internal battery. And then knowing when to slow down and the need to recharge, treating your emotional capacity as limited, like that, or like a gas tank. So for example, if your gas tank is half full, you're probably not going to drive to the mountains without filling it up. So we want to just drive around town, and we want to reduce our area that we're spending our energy if our gas tanks are low. And then also be mindful of people or situations that also deplete your energy. Because if your energy is already low and there's some situations that you know that are stressful, those will probably, just like your phone trying to get data different places, it's going to sap your energy. So finding a way to protect yourself and gravitate towards nutrition, healthy nutrition, drinking fluids regularly that you need, and things that support your energy will be even more important on those days. So that's how you can kind of be your own best friend, so to speak, on those days when you feel like you really need it because you might be dealing with some grief or loss. So has anybody dealt with any kind of losses that you can think of? Physical losses, hearing, eyesight, maybe not as good as it was, those kinds of things, wearing glasses, you know? Uh-huh.
I lost my sister-in-law on Friday night.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Wow, I'm so sorry,
I
Judy.
was there with her sons for several days last week as a support. And they did very well. It was a blessing that she was able to pass so quickly.
That she didn't suffer as more. That's really hard though, still. And it takes a lot of energy to go through that.
She's the last of my husband's whole family. They're all gone.
Yeah, so that's even a compounded loss when that's the case. Yeah. And being there together is really important because that's its own type of support. But I'm sorry, that's a big thing to go through. Does some of what I'm saying make sense?
I'm sorry.
Does some of what I'm saying make sense about conserving your energy?
And I'm thinking of them more than myself.
It's important to think of yourself in there too, though, because you were there and affected too. So there is a laddering tool that I think many of you use and don't really even realize it in exercise. It applies to exercise where you kind of build up just very gradually your endurance and what you can do on any of the exercise classes and machines and things like that. And our nurses are great about helping you with ways to integrate that and graduate things so that your blood pressure and things like that are protected. And to make adjustments if they still it needs to be adjusted or simplified. And so that's one of the things I really, enjoy about being here, seeing you all, no matter what you're going through, slowly work on ways to get yourself stronger, and then knowing that our nurses can also help you make adjustments if needed so that you're protected in that way and people are watching out for you. So one of the things that with grief is that it can affect and impact our executive sequencing, meaning our mental processing. And when our mental processing is impacted because we're dealing with like frustration or loss or a big thing like what Judy went through, then tasks get harder to think about because our processing is interrupted. So then task sequencing and initiation and activation can be hard because our mind can feel very scattered with all the different things that are going on. And so one of the things that when you feel very scattered that can help is a technique called laddering, where you start extremely small with small steps, similar to when you exercise. So for example, if you feel like you want to start something, but every time you think about it, like say cleaning your closet, every time you think about it, it seems like a huge thing. Then it's very important to start out even smaller, to ladder things. If you look at the picture of ladders, the one ladder seems way more harder to climb than the smaller ones. So we want to make things smaller. So you start by just even opening the door, laddering the things, making them smaller and building up, not unlike what you do with exercising. So small steps and little touches can conserve energy, and they build your window of tolerance while you move towards your goal. So in exercising, you're building your window of tolerance to exercise, your physical capabilities and your cardiovascular, each little bit that you exercise. That's a laddering type of technique for exercising. If you do small steps towards your goal of like cleaning a closet or calling a friend, asking for help in very small amounts, you can also build up to your tolerance. And so say, for example, you've lost something major and you feel like you need to kind of redo, say, your closet because some of the things that are in there, the mountain climbing equipment, no longer applies to what you can do. Starting out much smaller, where you just think about the closet and you think about what you might want to do with their mountain climbing equipment. Starting like with very simple. If you think maybe you might want to donate it to some place that it would be more meaningful to, that can help you with a way to get motivated to actually go and do the task. Versus if you just go, oh, I have to go in there and then try to do it all in one day, it's going to feel more overwhelming and your executive functioning might shut down even more. Starting smaller, thinking about the project, thinking about how you can go about it in smaller amounts, making it more meaningfully. Sometimes even places that you might want to donate to will have somebody that will even come pick it up for you if they know that that's something that one of their people might use. They might even have a volunteer or somebody that could come pick it up. But if you try to just jump in and do it all at once, it can even interfere more with your task initiation. So small steps and little touches can conserve energy, and they build our window of tolerance while moving in the direction towards the goal. Set a time like 10 minutes and start with the very smallest step on the ladder that feels doable, and then do the next step and then the next step. So that gets your motivation and your footing to help build traction. And once you get motivated and you get going, simple, just like here, it gets easier after you started. But when you first start, it's more challenging. So when you first start, you start small and you build. So an example would be if your goal is to call a friend to maybe ask for help, you start with something very simple as getting the phone, looking up their phone number, and sending maybe a text message and start very simple, like, hi, how are you? That's 3 things that you've already done. You're 3 steps up the ladder. And that makes it easier to talk to a friend than pushing yourself from the very beginning. I need to call them right now. Can sometimes feel over like too much, especially when you're dealing with a huge loss where you may feel like you need to work up to it. And then they could reply with a better time for you to have a conversation and or leave a voicemail of a better time to have a conversation. And then you're going up the ladder. And usually if people get stuck, what I encourage them to do is to break it into even smaller steps. So if you feel like you started a project and you're stuck, usually it's because the step you took is too big. So it's a good indication that maybe you need to stop and break things down even smaller. And there's no step that's too small because any step is progress. And so if it's just open the door to the closet and seeing what it is in there that you want to get rid of and thinking about then closing the door again and thinking about where it might get more use or be more meaningful, that is traction. That is steps on the ladder. Sharing your story so you don't carry it alone is really important. It divides the load in half. If you externalize your feelings, as we talked about earlier, it gets them out of your body. And so you're not carrying your feelings and your frustration with you pent up along with what it is you can no longer do. Both those things are hard to carry on your own. But I encourage people to be selective about sharing your story with somebody who you feel is supportive. If you sense somebody's not going to truly value or understand or benefit from hearing your story at the time, save it for a different time in person, because sometimes people are in a place where they can hear it better than others. And if, like, you share with somebody when you're feeling really vulnerable and they're in a rush, it tends to actually leave us feeling even like we're holding a bigger bag. And so I encourage people to like be selective about, especially when they first start sharing, just similar to sharing the ladder, sharing slowly with people that you feel can understand and that are more you're more comfortable with. And if somebody else doesn't have the time or doesn't understand, it really is okay. They're maybe in a different place. But it can be really draining if you're trying to still share and they're in a different place. And at the time when you don't have the energy for that, it's really good to kind of just dial things back and look for another situation that might be more comfortable, because we don't want to, spend our gas or our phone battery someplace that's not going to be helpful when we only have a limited amount of resources for that. So you can use your timeout and opt out as a pass if you're grieving and you need a rest. This applies if you even accept an invitation, but then you decide to change your mind. It really is okay to like change your mind and bow out of something if you need to. It's better than pushing yourself through and then not having a good experience, because then you'll have a better chance of going the next time or participating the next time. But give yourself permission to bow out if you need to. So even with like grief, things like grief support groups and processing groups, I encourage people that you're the customer. For things for like therapy, the same thing is true. Like you have the ability to say, not today, or I don't feel like sharing, and maybe another day. All those things are very legitimate. And they're important that you do that, because that's also how you conserve your energy when you need to as well. So just remember that no is a complete sentence. It is okay to use no and set boundaries or not right now. You do all have a choice, and it's better not to push past your window of tolerance. It's probably not going to be the best experience for anybody if you push yourself too hard. Same with if you exercise past what your point is, and it's probably not going to be the best scenario for anyone. So you're doing the best thing you can do by taking time out. In sports, they take time out, they huddle, they're allowed a certain amount of timeouts. But in life, a lot of times we don't give ourselves timeouts, and they're needed. Breaks, timeouts are really needed. So I have a little I have a typo in there. So the Snowflake Project is honoring loss. There's a little typo in my slide, but if anybody's interested in, I have a little snowflake project where people cut out the things that they've lost along the way, whether it's your physical activities or your strengths or your hearing or your eyesight or friends, transportation, independence, things like that. And then as you cut those things out, then when you open it up, the things that remain are all the things that are in your life that are left. And they still often are beautiful. And it still often is unique, because your losses will be different than somebody else's losses. So like snowflakes, everybody's is unique and everyone's story is unique, but that is kind of the beauty of life also. So I have scissors and I have paper if anybody would like to participate in that after the talk. Does anyone have any questions or anything to add? Does it make sense?
Not a question, but I'm gonna ask, I don't wanna put you on the spot.
Mhm.
You alluded to this, and it's not totally related to law. You speak to the concept of asking for help, because my observations working with people, some people have a hard time with that. So, you know, some people can ask for help and others can't, and what's the trick to making yourself be more accepting of being help? And the two types of people recognize they need it, but for some reason, they're so independent, they don't want to have.
So the question is about asking for help. And what is it about asking for help that's challenging, and how can we
People get better about that?
How can we get better about asking for help? So one of the things about asking for help that can be so challenging is that our society teaches us that independence and pulling yourself up by the bootstraps is the gold standard of success. And that has been part of American society since they came over on the Mayflower, or however historically things were built, is that independence is a strong American westernized trait. And so we're all taught that our whole entire lives. And at the same time, the truth is any society functions interdependently, where we're all part of the working whole. Nobody is their own banker, teacher, career person, their own electrician, their own plumber. No one can be everything. And so we are interdependent. We do depend on other people, but we don't acknowledge it as a society. Very often, it's the whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And so it's very hard to get past something, a mentality and a teaching that you've learned your whole entire life. And then just all of a sudden, when you need help, to do things immediately differently. Because when your mind and the pathways in your mind tell you to do it, and that is how a neurological pathway has been routed for your whole entire life, all of a sudden changing that overnight just because you happen to sprain your ankle is really, really difficult for most people. But it's even more difficult for people who are, the longer you were independent and the more that you helped others, the harder it can be for you to accept the help. It's almost even harder to just turn the bus around even a little bit. So usually my suggestion for that is to start out small, like the laddering, and practice. And the way that you can practice is by even asking somebody for something that you don't necessarily really need help with, that's easy, that's simple and easy. And seeing that the other person will do it, and that it actually isn't that bad. Because for as much as we like helping other people, most of y'all probably like helping people too. And so it actually can build community, asking for help and seeing somebody else do something. But you have to, just like exercise, the best thing you can do is practice, because the truth is we've all been practicing the way we are for as long as we've lived. So however old you are, you practiced your whole entire life to be who you are, the way you are now. And so changing that overnight takes practice too. So start little. So for example, I had a patient who had just recently been diagnosed with cancer, and she felt fine, but obviously something came back in an x-ray where she wasn't fine, and she knew she was going to have to do surgery and treatment. And she said, I can't ask anybody for help. I'm the one in my household that does everything. And yet I'm going to know that I'm going to need help because I have to have chemotherapy. And so I don't know how to manage this. I can't imagine how I'm going to be able to do everything in that, but I also am not going to ask for help. So I suggested that she start asking for help before she needed help so that she could practice it before it actually happened where she needed help. And then you ask for small things like, can you pass me something? Can you pick something up for me? Very small things. And when the more that you can see that it's okay, the more you can train yourself to ask when the time comes when you actually really do need help. It's not going to change who you are and the last however many years you've been doing things like that, but it can create a new little pathway, just like exercising did. Strengthening that same muscle, it gets a little bit stronger and a little bit stronger. So you're strengthening that same muscle, the ask for help muscle, because you've already got the I help others muscle is really strong, like Popeye. But we need to build up the it's okay to ask for help muscle very slowly, a little bit at a time. And that is usually the best way. You can also do what I call role playing, where you can practice with somebody. If you know somebody else has problem asking for help and you have problem asking for help, you can say, hey, can you practice with me? And you can practice the conversation asking for help with something even really small. And it feels weird at first because it is uncomfortable. That's why you're practicing. Okay? Mm-hmm.
I had a situation a couple of weeks ago where my kids were away from me, my girls, right, three. And, I don't know what was going on with me for sure, but I went back into my bedroom and my oldest daughter came in and she said, what's going on with you? You said, we're here. We want to help you.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to ask,
It is.
but that must have been obvious.
Mm-hmm. So another thing you can also do is imagine in your mind what it feels like to help others. And so then that's the gift you give somebody else by letting them help you. That same feeling that you have when you help others, if you allow them to help you, they get the gift of that same feeling.
Easier for me to ask her.
Because you've practiced it.
Yes, it's not supposed to be that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But we've all practiced for a long time to be the way we are. And it's served us well. I mean, that's what society rewards is the independence. But it doesn't always serve us long term. And other people, it feels good to help. And so don't take that opportunity away from other people. Share with them. I know it's easier said than done. That's why you start small. That's why we have to practice. Same like with the exercising you all do.
Well, it's easier for me to ask a friend
Mm-hmm.
than it is to tell my kids I need help.
Mm-hmm. And so you start there, start small. Because you've been taking care of your kids. You've been practicing taking care of your kids. So the parent in you wants to still be the parent. And it is harder to flip those roles because that's this natural nurturing role that you have. And you've been doing it the whole time you've been their parent. And so it's also about switching roles with them to ask them for help. And so it might be something where you might need to think of them just for a minute as a friend.
Worked it on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's baby steps for everyone. It's hard. It is. That's why people avoid it. But that's also why I'm talking about it. To kind of encourage you guys, and you know I'm around if you ever want to practice. Any other questions? All right, thank you. Have any questions online?
No questions on Zoom?
You have stuff like joined in the title and not trying.